So, as Plato would have said, you ought not to attempt to cure the body without the soul, for this is the great error of our day in the treatment of the human body, that physicians separate the soul from the body. I don't know if you think he was onto something, but I think he was. And if you wanted a very clear statement of the importance of mind-body medicine, well, the ancient Greeks were onto it. So, as I said, there's nothing really new under the sun. So, as it says down the bottom, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. So I'm going to try and be a little bit more explicit and to say how attention, mind and body are very much linked. So let's talk about the stress response just for the lady down the front who has experienced it before. As it says here, as you can see, Murray's experiencing the stress response, and I suppose in this situation you call it the fight or flight response. And he better activate it pretty fast. Now, Murray's in a clearly perceived threatening situation. He's been practicing mindfulness and he's been practicing being in the present moment. He's summed up his situation and life's not travelling very well right at this very moment, this point in time. So his body's going to activate the stress response, which you would say is probably not inappropriate in this situation. His adrenaline's going to start pumping through his body, so his blood pressure's going to go up, his cardiac output's going to go up, so his heart's thumping. The circulation's really driving, so he's got a lot of blood pumping through his system because he's anticipating really exerting himself over the next few minutes. Like he's going to be flapping his arms really, really hard and coming down to a soft landing, all right? So he's going to need a lot of energy on board as well. So his circulation's pumping and he's having fuel pumped into his bloodstream. So sugars and fats are pumping into his bloodstream. This is fuel he needs to burn. He's got to keep himself cool while he's exerting himself, so he's sweating. So his body starts sweating to keep himself cool while he's exerting himself. Also, the blood is being pumped to the muscles very quickly. So the blood vessels to the muscles are opening up, and that means the blood's got to come from somewhere else. So from non-essential services, the blood's diverted. So you would say, well, is digesting breakfast a really high priority at the moment? You'd say probably not. We'll come back and do breakfast in a few minutes. So the blood flow to the gut is being shut down. So his gut is basically shutting down, but all the blood's going to the muscles. And also the blood's being diverted from the skin as well. So he's going pale because that blood's being diverted elsewhere. So he's going pale and he's sweaty, his blood is pumping around the system. Also, if he's going to be exerting himself, he needs a lot of oxygen on board to burn the fuel. So he's breathing fast, his respiratory drive kicks in and he's starting to breathe fast. But of course, if you're exerting yourself like Murray in this situation, it's not experienced as anxiety. It's experienced as a turbocharge of energy. It's experienced as a surge of energy, and you will find yourself able to do things that in the normal scheme of things you didn't think you could do. All right? So this is an adaptive, life-saving, positive, useful response when it's switched on in an appropriate situation like this. Now, however, we sort of think, well, wait, isn't stress bad for our health? Well, in Murray's situation, it's not bad for our health at all. In fact, it's the only thing that's going to save him. His blood's getting thick and sticky, his body's pumping out inflammatory chemicals to mobilise his immune system. It's a whole cascade of changes. Now, I'll ask you a few very important questions. So does anybody here ever get anxious before events and stressed before events? What kinds of things? Sorry? Yeah? Oh, we get all those kinds of effects, but we get anxious before an interview or anxious before a public speaking, yeah, anxious before going to the dentist, meeting the rellos. You could be a St Kilda supporter, you're getting anxious before the weekends now. All right, sorry if I've opened up a few wounds there. It's all right, I can empathise. I'm a Richmond supporter, so I know a lot about trauma associated with the football. So we could be getting stressed before events. We could also get very stressed and anxious after events. You ever get stressed over something from the past? Angry, tense over things that have happened in the past? Made a mistake in the past? Why did I do that? And keep going over it. Now the question is, in this case we can see where the stressor is. But in these situations before or after an event, in fact an event that may never happen, an event that's already long since come and gone, where is the stressor then? Where is it? In here, that's right. The mind's imagining, the mind's projecting, the mind's catastrophizing, the mind's worrying, the mind's ruminating. We can give it a lot of different names, but the mind has a very fertile capacity to project, to imagine. That's great, it's a creative skill if we're using it well. But when the mind is doing this and we're taking mental projections to be real, the body activates the stress response as if the threat was actually there. So we're talking about public speaking, for example, a few moments ago. We could be days and weeks prior to an event, imagining ourselves getting up there and imagining this happening or that happening. And it doesn't matter that we could be in a completely stress-free environment. If we're imagining all of that and taking this sort of future as if it was happening now, then the body faithfully activates the stress response. And in that situation, it's experienced as anxiety. In that situation, it's being activated with nowhere to go. Going pale, respiratory drives kicking in, breathing fast, getting sweaty, getting tremulous, the adrenaline's going around but it's got nowhere to go, blood sugars and fats are going up, heart thumping. But the response is being activated inappropriately, unnecessarily, and it's not being allowed to switch off. Now this doesn't just have effects on feeling anxious. These cumulative effects have effects on our brain as well, and have effects on serotonin, which affects mood as well, and effects on everything right down to our DNA. Now these are reversible effects if we learn how to switch off the inappropriate activation of the stress response. But firstly, we've got to recognise that we're doing it. Secondly, we've got to recognise the difference between imagination and reality. And thirdly, we've got to get our attention back onto the present moment reality so that we can actually see if there really is a threat there, well then run. But if there's not really a threat there, and we actually acknowledge that in the present moment, then the stress response will start to switch itself off. Does that make sense? We're talking about the principles of mindfulness here, the principles of paying attention. Mindfulness as a form of meditation is not a distraction, it's actually a form of paying attention. So we can see what's really there, and we can cease to be taken in by projections of things that aren't actually there. We could experience a stressor once in the past and go over it 1,000 times in our mind and turn one stressor into 1,000. If we want to generate stress and anxiety in our life, that's a really good way to do it. And unfortunately, much of the time we find ourselves doing it without even realising we're doing it. And it feels real to us because we're certainly taking that mental projection to be real. So I hope that makes sense between the appropriate and the inappropriate activation, and that we need to get some awareness around that and know how to switch the inappropriate activation off. That will take a lot of physiological wear and tear off that system, off the brain and off the body. It's a reversible thing if we learn to do that. So the fight or flight response, it's appropriate and life-protecting provided it's turned on when it needs to be, and we turn it off when it's no longer needed, and if we're not doing it all the time. Okay? So that's just a basic summary of what we've been saying.